Part 2 of the modern series. We already talked about the future of Africa, but today talk about something that is a much more controversial issue than talking about just the future, of countries. That's immigration. Europe, the Middle East, and the Americas, and Australia. I don't know why I don't want to immigrate to Australia. Yeah. Yeah, because of all the dangerous animals in Australia. But those are typically the most immigrated places into the world. But most immigration factors do not factor in the birth rates of countries. Okay. So here's some soccer here. Some of the highest immigrant countries in the world. We all know China famously has the world birth rate, as China's population in 2023 has declined. But there are some countries that have thus fallen below replacement. So these countries, well, you can look up the stats. The official stats of these countries have a below replacement fertility rate. Turkey, India, Vietnam, Argentina, and Mexico. All of these countries, Argentina, more recent statistics say the birth rate is around 1.4. Mexico ranges from 1.8 to 1.6. India is around 2, which is below 2.1. And Vietnam is around 1.9 currently. And Turkey, using government statistics, is around 1.6. This is going to be very disastrous for all of these countries that are mentioned, as these are large sources of immigrants to other countries. Oh, but you can use Africa. The problem is, Africa has its own crises that are happening in its continent. And eventually, Africa's birth rate is going to eventually fall below 2.1 by 2100. So this immigration is not the solution. I repeat you, it is not the solution. The solution, as well. For example, Denmark, this country here, has taken a far more stricter stance on immigration. Basically saying that, hey, let's just say someone comes from Poland, and basically this guy from Poland says, "Oh, I don't want to be Danish. I'm gonna continue to be Polish." Well, according to Denmark, Poland, he go back to Poland. Okay, I'm just using that example because that's a much easier example. But it's getting even worse for a country like Ukraine, Russia, where their birth rates are ultra low, or places like South Korea. This is not the solution, as these countries all have a sub-replacement fertility rate of 2.1. India thus fell below. Mexico fell below 5 years ago. And we'll talk about the fertility problem of Latin America in another video, and how that could impact the future of demographics of the USA. As we don't want to put that whole thing in this video, as most people, even the US themselves, tend to ignore the massively falling fertility rates in Latin America, which means there's a high chance that a lot of people who immigrate from this part of the world comes back because the governments want, more people back in the country. And I wouldn't be surprised if all ethnicities in the US immigrate to Argentina, Brazil, Mexico, not just Hispanics alone, as it is impacting all Latin American countries. But as proven, immigration is not the solution. It is definitely not the solution to this problem, as all countries will eventually go through the demographic transition. What we have to do is convince people to have more kids. It is just that simple. The problem is, we have to go through the hard part first before we go through and realize, we actually may need kids. In every societal issue, we're going to have to go through the hard things first before people realize. Because most people do not pay attention to this stuff, okay, until it actually hits their community. For example, more recently, a similar issue, illegal immigration into the U.S. Well, Texas said basically the TLDR of this we're going to draw Texas's border here. Texas said no more, and they started putting them into major U.S. metropolitan areas. They're saying, you know what, we're too many people. We have 30 million people. That's too much people for us to handle. Okay, so the people who want these people now have to deal with it. People are finally starting to realize that if immigration is done in the U.S., it needs to be done the proper way, and people need to become Americans. Like how it used to be in the 1910s and the 1920s, where people came through on from Europe. Well, a lot of them wanted to become Americans. And that's how immigration, I think, should be. People will assimilate into the culture, and that's how it is. That's what Denmark is doing. But I still think immigration is still not the solution of any kind, simply because Mexico's birth rate is 1.6. And also, even like the Hispanic birth rate is only 1.9 in the US. It is below replacement rate. And if you include native-born Hispanics, it is probably much lower than the 1.9 as well. It's probably converging with the white total fertility rate, which is around 1.6, or near the black fertility rate, which is around 1.6. Again, these are taken from the U.S. actual statistics. So, yeah. I think the thing we need to do is that we need to go through and realize most of the normies, not people like the Amish, because the Amish, they're safe. They don't have to worry about their group going extinct. Same thing with the non-conforming Mormons and the Orthodox Jews. We're talking about the U.S. specifically. Amish and similar groups. Jews, the Hawaii Jews, I don't know how to spell that, and some non-conforming Mormons, not the normies, not the normie Mormons, the ones that are continuing to spread the faith around this part of the U.S. as well, and some native groups in Alaska. Okay, those are the only, and the native groups in Alaska are eventually going to fall below total fertility rate. So these are the only groups that are the only ones that are kind of resisting this. Okay, they're kind of resisting the whole thing, the whole fertility decline. I think by the 2060s, most of us will realize that not having kids was a big mistake. Okay, it's going to hit the white community first because the white community had the lowest birth rate of all, but it's going to probably slowly afterwards hit the black community and probably first along the Hispanic community since they have the highest fertility rate. It's probably going to hit the Asians first because Asians, they have the lowest, and Native Americans, 1.3 for Native Americans and Asians. Okay, but out of the major groups, not because Asians only make up like 6 to 7% of the U.S. population, and mostly usually does assimilate into the population anyways, they're going to realize that this is a big mistake. Similar thing is going to happen in Europe. Okay, the childless people, especially women, are going to realize this is a massive mistake as well. It's eventually going to hit the developing countries as well, like Mexico, El Salvador, Colombia, Brazil, Argentina, and especially Puerto Rico. The situation in Puerto Rico is so bad, no one talks about it. Even like the people who talk about this stuff, demography, Puerto Rico's birth rate is basically the same as South Korea's. Okay, I know in the U.S. it's slightly higher, like 1.4 to 1.5, but that's still far below replacement rate. Puerto Ricans are likely going to fall below 1 million total on the island, and will probably fall in population in the U.S. Puerto Ricans, I think, are on the endangered list of cultures as well. And we'll talk about Latin America and, the birth rate and also its impact on the U.S. and its impact on their countries as well. But there's going to be a large old age dependency ratio in most of these countries. And immigration, of course, as they stated, is not the solution. They're going to say, what about immigration from Africa? But those countries are going to probably face the same problems as Latin America as well, because people are going to be leaving the country. People need, immigration is for example, let's go back to the case of Latin America. Immigration is just as bad for Mexico, per se, than immigration. For example, 34 million Mexicans or people of Mexican descent live in the U.S. Obviously, Mexico has a population of around 140 million to 142 million. Okay, this probably is strained Mexico's economy a little bit because Mexico lost that 12 to 14 million people it would have otherwise had in its economy. So immigration hurts both the country and country tree that it hurts the country that is even from more than it hurts it, that host nation. Okay. The biggest dramatic example of this is Puerto Rico. Okay, Puerto Rico lost 1 million people, mostly due to people moving to the U.S. Same thing with Cuba, and these people are going to decline severely on their own countries. If Puerto Rico and Cuba cannot convince people to stay in the country, this is a pretty big problem for these countries. This is why I said immigration is not the solution. I think the best thing for both Latin America and the USA is that USA closes border for immigration besides Puerto Rico, because Puerto Rico is a part of the U.S. They can't really do anything in Puerto Rico, but you have to realize that immigration is hurting these nations, especially like El Salvador, Cuba, Jamaica. Okay, what's Jamaica? There was Jamaica. Haiti, Dominican Republic, because these countries are losing people. Okay, for example, let's look at the birth rate. Okay, the birth rate of Cuba and the birth rate of around here, 1.3. Puerto Rico is around 0.7 to 0.8. Okay, Colombia, using government statistics, is around 1.4. Brazil is around 1.4. Argentina is around 1.4. These countries are around 1.3. And most likely, Bolivia. No, not Bolivia. Bolivia is here. Bolivia is probably the only country, and Venezuela are the only two countries I think that are above replacement, and Dominican Republic and Haiti. Okay, those are the only countries I think that are above replacement at this point. Okay, and maybe some Central American countries like Panama. Okay, but even the Central American and of course Guatemala probably has a pretty high one too, and Honduras. But outside of those, like 1.7, I think this country's at 2. This country's at 1.3, and Panama is like at 2.1. Same thing with Peru as well. Okay, again, this is pretty bad for Latin America. And I think it also just signaling a rather massive decline in total fertility rate in Catholic nations. Okay, because you're seeing the fertility rate in these countries converge with the Latin countries of Southern Europe and Poland. Okay, you're seeing the convergence fertility rate of these countries over here. Okay, so Catholics are at a very, very bad spot. They're at a very bad spot. And this is why immigration is not the solution, because these people, these countries are going to have the same problem as the U.S. Okay, these countries are going to probably have it worse than the U.S. because all of the young people are fleeing Latin America. They don't want to live here. And that's the problem, because these countries, because the U.S. will probably be able to handle a higher average AIDS. Let's say it goes to 48. Okay, higher average AIDS better than a country like Brazil. Okay, which will also probably have an average AIDS by 2060 of around 48. Okay, Brazil is going to suffer way more than the U.S. It is, because Brazil doesn't have the money and resources to do it, and that's why this is a problem. Okay, and people talk about, what about overpopulation? That's the big concern. Oh yeah, Elon Musk and many others are trying to get people to use space travel. Okay, by 2050 to have a colony on Mars. So don't lecture me about overpopulation when we're really trying to colonize both Mars and probably the moon soon afterwards. Okay, we're going to have to need people for Mars and the moon. Okay, but people are going to learn the hard lesson first in the West and East Asia. Okay, then following it a couple decades after, Latin America and Southeast Asia and India, a couple decades, and Iran. Okay, there's also a religion crisis in Iran, if you did not know that, there's a religion crisis in Iran. Well, Islam is no longer the majority religion in Iran. No longer. Okay, only like around 38%, 38 to 40% of Iranians, I think, at this point, are Muslims. That is pretty dire for Iran, for Iran culturally and demographically, because Islam is one of the most, besides, some Protestant sects and Mennonites, okay, as well. We're going to see Elon Musk is talking about a population collapse, and immigration is not the solution to a population collapse, okay? We're always starting to see this in a country like Canada, okay? I think the best example is Canada and UK. Immigrants are starting to leave by choice already in these countries. Especially when it comes to the 2060s and 2070s, these countries are going to be wanting immigration, especially from diaspora communities. People say, no countries have ever done that before. I'll put you some examples. Russia. Okay. Russia's population increase from 1990 to 2000s has mostly been from Russian diaspora communities in the former SSRs. Okay. Russian diaspora communities moved to the millions into Russia. Okay. Israel is the next example of this. Okay. After a certain event that we don't want to talk about, and that happened in Europe during World War II, to the Jewish population, well, ever since Israel became a state, Israel has encouraged a lot of immigration of Jews to Israel. This has been happening since the country's independence, and will probably continue happening for the foreseen years. The next country is Spain and Portugal. Both of these countries have relied on immigration from diaspora countries. For example, I was kind of shocked that Canada has more Mexican immigrants than Spain, because you're like, not Spain? It'll be much easier for someone from Mexico to live in Spain than Canada. Okay? It'll be much easier for someone, because Mexico, okay, most Mexican people are part Spanish. Okay? But going back to Spain, a lot of Spain's main source of immigration, besides Morocco, because Morocco is right there, is mostly from Latin America. Same thing with Portugal. These countries have relied on the diaspora to basically, at the current moment, to essentially use these diaspora communities as a safety net. Okay? Same thing with Argentina. Argentina had, received large immigrants from Europe, but they're also accepting immigrants from culturally similar countries as kind of a safety net at the current moment, because, of course, it's much easier for Argentina to assimilate someone from Peru, Bolivia, Chile, Paraguay, and Uruguay, because they both speak a similar language. Most of them are partially Spanish anyways, which means they're partially European of ancestry, which means, because Argentina is a mostly European country, these people are much easier can be very easily assimilated into Argentina. And you might see the same thing with countries of high immigration rates. Jamaica, Mexico, Cuba, Colombia, and Iran as well, and India, and Vietnam, and Korea as well. Okay, for example, Colombia has a birth rate of 1.5. Okay, Colombia has around 5 million people living outside of Colombia, with the highest diasporas in the United States, Venezuela, and Spain. So, I'm just using Colombia as an example. For example, when Colombia starts seeing a population decline, they can use this population as a safety net. I think the best example of this would be Koreans in the future. Okay, since Korea has such a low birth rate, but for a little while, Korea can accept immigration from US, China, Japan, and Canada, and Uzbekistan, and Russia simply because they have such a large population outside of the Korean peninsula. Okay? We're not counting people from North Korea as that's people from North Korea, but there are around 7 million Koreans outside of Korea as well, which means countries of Korean minorities, Korea can basically say, hey, come back to Korea. Okay, we have a very low birth rate. We'll definitely use your help to raise the birth rate in Korea. Okay, and I'm using both Colombia and Korea as an example because both of those countries have a very low birth rate. Both of them. Okay, and I think the best example of this is India. So India has 32 million people living outside of India, mostly in the Middle East and the US, and several Asian countries, and the UK and Canada, and South Africa. Even Nigeria has over 1 million people from India. Okay, especially when India's population is expected to start declining by 2060, India can rely on the 32 million and growing diaspora number of people to return, so India's population for the short term does not decline. I think more countries will use this strategy, and it's more than likely going to happen in the future. Russia has done it, not too surprising there. Spain and Portugal have done it. Even Japan has done it to a certain extent. It is very common for countries to encourage diaspora communities to return back to the country. Heck, every European country, if you have an ancestor from these countries in the US, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, you basically are just granted free citizenship in those countries. You still have to learn this language, but because you are of that country by blood, you can come back to the country and earn a living in those countries, especially in Ireland, especially like France and all those countries in Europe. If you are European, if you're diaspora of those countries, you can move back, but you haven't really seen many people from those countries come back outside of Spain and Portugal, obviously. Well, it's very easy for, and also the Dutch nation as well, Netherlands, where they were, okay, not nation, Netherlands as well, for the beginning, they did use diaspora communities as until they started saying, hey, okay, we'll just open up to the Middle East. But first they started accepting immigrants from the colonies like Suriname and Indonesia because those people from those countries are going to be much easier to integrate because you don't have the language barrier and don't have the problem. I think the main problem with immigration current days is a language barrier. Okay, reason why, Indians are moving to places like the US, UK, and Canada, let's just say over over a country like, let's just say, Brazil, is because a lot of Indians do speak English. So it's much easier for an Indian who knows English, who wants to have a good paying job in the US, to easily integrate as well. But the problem is, in the future, when India has a declining population, when Mexico has a declining population, when Colombia has a declining population, because sorry, these countries do not want to have a declining population. Because they have not reached that era yet. Okay, Puerto Rico, for example, I won't be surprised if Puerto Rico starts encouraging Puerto Ricans living outside, mostly in the US, to come back to the island. As well. And India, and especially China. Okay, China's gonna try to do it too, more than likely. Korea's gonna do it too. Japan already tried to do it, but there wasn't many Japanese diaspora. I think there's gonna be more people from the Japanese diaspora moving back to Japan, especially from Brazil, Peru, and the US as well. But the thing with Asians in the New World is that Asians' birth rates around the world mirror the birth rates in the actual country. This has been pulled from multiple statistics. This includes even Indians as well. Is that Indians, alongside East Asians, are going to have extremely low birth rates. Heck, there are some Indian states. So J&K or Jammu and Kashmir, Ladakh, okay, Lakshadweep, Goa, Andaman and Nicobar Islands, Puducherry, Sikkim, all have already ultra low fertility rate, and we haven't even hit, and this is from 2019, this is before COVID-19, from 2019 to 2020. India's birth rate has likely fallen below this, which means places like Delhi have probably fallen below to also low fertility rates, and places like West Bengal as well, which means only Uttar Pradesh, Jharkhand, and Bihar and Meghalaya, cool province name, sounds like Megalania, yeah, all are the only states, also Manipur, but I think Manipur is probably wrong too. All of these states are also among the poorest states in India. All of them are the only states of above fertility replacement. Okay, which means most of India is going to have a population decline by 2060, which means only Bihar, Meghalaya, Jharkhand, Manipur, and Uttar Pradesh in safe territory of non-population decline. This is pretty bad for India because India is the most population in the world, and basically India does not want to lose people because India wants to become a global power. And what they're going to do for the very beginning to try to mitigate the population loss is, like with Europe, they're going to add immigrants. Heck, even like the Mexican, news networks are saying that Mexico needs to start accepting immigrants. Okay, here we go, we found it. Mexico will need migrant talent as population aid, which means that I know the whole border thing. Yeah, it took me like 10 minutes to find the article because there was like 100 articles about the U.S. border. Okay, but this is but aging, aging, as we talked about, is a big problem for many countries. This is, the demographic crisis is it's global. It's gonna happen to everyone. Even Islamic countries are facing this crisis, like Iran and Turkey, okay, and Arab Emirates, and even like Qatar, and Saudi Arabia will soon join too. Saudi Arabia will soon join. Algeria will soon join too. Okay, this is a crisis as well, and same thing with Korea, as we talked about, as well as India, as well as Colombia. Mexico, I wouldn't be too surprised if they start taking a lot of immigration from the United States and also from other countries, not just the United States. But yeah, basically this whole article is talking about how Mexico, as well as population, is still relatively young, and saying that the country is starting to age rapidly. The country is starting to age rapidly, and by around 2050, Mexico's population will start declining. Okay, it will start declining, and it has always seen a phenomenon, already seen, with middle income countries, with the poorest population becoming greater at the unprecedented rates. Many countries have been relying on immigration for the long-term potential. But immigration, as I said in the video title, is not the issue. It's not the solution, because most of these immigrants, well, of course, if it's like people who speak Spanish from other Hispanophone countries or immigrants from the U.S., they will be much more easy to assimilate than, let's say, someone from Saudi Arabia or Uzbekistan. Okay, but it's going to be a big, big problem for most of the world. Okay. And now with places like Malaysia, Mexico, and Turkey, the West is not going to be the main source of immigration. Whereas for every Western nation, will be kind of like a sigh of relief. But it'll become a bigger issue once more countries start declining by 2060, 2050, and as early as 2040s in the case of Brazil, and even as of now, like South Korea and Taiwan and China. So more of these countries are going to start compete with immigrants, and that's why immigration is not the solution. I think people are going to have to learn the hard way. Once they reach the end of their life, okay, they realize, okay, let's just say, any of these countries, any country like Iran, or Iranian, or Indian, or Mexican, or Brazilian, or a South African, or Indonesian, or Argentine, or Turkish, they're going to realize that not having kids is a big problem. There's going to be less people to take care of them. They might die. Life expectancy might decrease in these countries because And all these countries that are affected, they could of course accept immigrants from Africa, but Africa will probably go through its own problems like famines, war, and droughts. Okay, this is the crisis. The demographics is the crisis of the 21st century. It truly is. Okay, because Africa is not going to be a very reliable area because a lot of African countries are unstable. Okay, and there'll probably be a lot of refugees from Africa, and a lot of countries that gonna be hell nah, because they're gonna be going, this is good, and basically people are gonna have to go through the hard way and realize that future generations are gonna have kids. We're gonna have to have kids and not be like us. Okay. There's also the sperm count thing, which I did not neglected to mention as well, but that's also a pretty huge problem. But again, I think technology will overcome that issue and overcome that problem. I think technology will eventually overcome that problem as well. But cultures that refuse to accept that technology are gonna die off. Which we're saying the Catholic world, probably some Muslim cultures and African cultures, that want to say 100%, I am not, 100% for transhumanism, but it is basically just to save our species from extinction, from infertility crisis. I am all definitely 100% for it as well, considering that we can, we can create, we can use CRISPR to genetically, make sure we can, cure the disease. Because there is a disease caused by plastics, caused by phthalates, I think that's what they're called, that is causing infertility in us and other species like pandas, bees, as well, and of course rats and mice. Okay? Because pandas existed for 7 million years. You really think pandas are going extinct because they're just stupid? No, there has to be some bigger reason behind this. Okay? And this is why immigration is not the solution to this. Because eventually the immigrant groups are gonna converge and are gonna start declining once, they assimilate into the culture. Okay? As well. Okay? Of course, countries like the US and Denmark have done a much better job at assimilating migrants than other countries because they teach people the values of the culture. And teach people to assimilate. A country like Canada, the UK, and France are not going to be too lucky. Okay? The whole world is still this whole fertility crisis. Every country is its own separate petri test. Okay? Eventually they're going to find something that sticks, and that's going to be the big solver of the fertility crisis. And immigration and what Hungary is doing, honestly, is not the solution. Goodbye.